as I told you last time I presented, I've been working on the history of the railroads in North America and some of the different aspects. And obviously Chicago, the trains are running all over the place with other people's track on other people's tracks. But I looked at Minneapolis and St. Paul because of the two cities. It's fairly complicated here, and so I started to get into each one, how each of the railroads got from one city to the other. And so that'd be interesting to look at that. This is a map of the Twin City terminals. So here's the Sioux line. Here's the Northern Pacific. That's orange,
Yep.
and the NP came over here, and then the Great Northern is blue, and then the Milwaukee is red. And those are really the four railroads that own track. Everybody else ran on these railroads. And so what I'm going to try to do is go through the major railroads that had facilities in St. Paul first, go through each one, and then Minneapolis. So we'll talk about the NorthWestern next. Now this again is the NorthWestern trains, but it's really Omaha trackage. Now the NorthWestern came in across. They went up to Milwaukee, and then they came across up through Eau Claire, and then came into the east side. And they built a yard here at East St. Paul. And so they enter the plant they enter the Great Northern at Westminster, and then they go down to the St. Paul Union Depot
I need
plant.
his attention and both.
And then they had to back out, and then the 400s would have to go across on the Great Northern Passenger Main over here through the campus, across the Stone Arch Bridge to the Great Northern Depot, and then they had a coach yard and freight yard up at West Minneapolis, or as the railroaders called it, in Omaha, Northtown. Then the freight trains would come in this way, and they would break them up here, and then they would run, or they would go to East Minneapolis Yard, which was a big yard they built right next to Union Yard for the Great Northern. They also had a line. Took trackage rights down here on the Milwaukee across the bridge. They had Western Avenue here, yard, and then they went across the bridge, and then they got on their own track down here, and that's the line that goes to Mankato, Worthington, and on to Omaha. And so this is the West Minneapolis aerial view from the internet. This is the Northern Pacific going around here. I call it the Mulberry Bridge because it's going to Mulberry Junction, but it's the bridge up north there of downtown. And this was the half a roundhouse and big freight yard, kind of shoehorn in here, coach yard for the NorthWestern. And here's a postcard showing the 400, probably in the early, probably late 40s, and with E3s. And this is one of Greg's collection that the E3 or E6s on the 400s ready to leave the Great Northern Depot. I took this one in 1970, right, and this is Copper's Coke back here, and this is on the Great Northern. Now, normally this was the freight main. This is passenger main, freight main. But as we got later, there were fewer passenger trains, so they started using the passenger mains for freight trains. And these are General Electric U30Cs, and these are there are only 7 of these that the NorthWestern had, and it's not good to buy one. 7 of a unit of a new manufacturer. They didn't have very good luck with them because they really didn't know how to repair them.
Minus phone number.
This is a transfer run going from St. Paul Union Depot area out to Western Avenue. So it's right by downtown.
Okay.
And this is, I believe, is St. Louis Park. And this is on the M and St. L. The tracks over here are the Milwaukee. This is a coal train down at Hoffman Avenue, and it's a 4 SD40-2s, and it's 2 of them are NorthWestern, 2 of them are UP, shades of things to come. But it's going to some of the plants in Wisconsin that the NorthWestern serve. And here's a train coming in on to the St. Paul Bridge and Terminal. That's that little yard that's right by the sewage treatment plant. And so there is a unit grain train going that'll go across the St. Paul Bridge and Terminal bridge. This is an SD45 that's right at the High Bridge plant, the old High Bridge plant. And I put it in because this is unit they really needed. They bought them in the 60s, and they had bought 70 some of them, but they were the only railroad out of the 1,200 and some units they sold that didn't buy dynamic brakes, because Northwestern really didn't have a lot of grades, so they just said we don't need them.
Ross?
Put one picture of Zito yellow in. Zito was an executive who said we got to put a brighter yellow on. So here's the old yellow, here's the new yellow, and some people liked it and others didn't. So anyway, this is the Great Western. Now the Great Western was the Chicago, St. Paul, and Kansas City, and they went to built to Old Wine, Iowa, which was they were way ahead of their time with the hub and spoke philosophy. They did everything at Old Wine, Iowa. Then they went up to St. Paul. They went to um, Omaha to Kansas City, and everywhere from Old Wine. Well, anyway, they came up here, and their passenger trains would come up through South St. Paul, and then cross the lift bridge you've all seen downtown St. Paul, which as I understand they're thinking about replacing it. Um, and then they would go through the St. Paul Union Depot plant, and then they would get on the Great Northern, go up to Westminster, go across the Great Northern passenger line, over the Stone Arch into the Great Northern Depot in Minneapolis. Now the Great Northern, or excuse me, the Great Western. The Great Western bought the Boom Island Yard and the freight terminal that was owned by the Wisconsin Central, because the Wisconsin Central got taken over by the Soo Line, so they didn't need that yard anymore, the freight terminal downtown. And so that the Boom Island became their coach yard and freight yard right on Boom Island. And then they had this big freight terminal right next to the Great Northern Depot in Minneapolis. Now the
Hey,
freight trains came in
Ross.
a big yard at South St. Paul, and then they bought this St. Paul Bridge and Terminal track and bridge. And so then they would get on trackage rights with the Burlington and the Milwaukee, go up the hill and across, and then they shoehorned a 2,200 car yard right here between the elevators. And so then they would come across here and transfer to the other railroads. So that's a Great Western. Here's the picture. This is from the internet. It's kind of fuzzy, but it shows probably train number 6 from Omaha. It's been through the St. Paul Union Depot, and now it's going up the hill. It's going to turn right beyond the picture. It's going to turn to the west at Westminster. This is I took this at St. Paul, South St. Paul Yard in the late 60s. And Greg, this is from your collection. It's a transfer run going back to South St. Paul, and it's going across the lift bridge downtown St. Paul. And as I understand it, back then, the railroads had to haul transfer interchange cars to the other railroad, and then they go back empty. And then later on, they got to haul both ways. But the union agreements, I guess, were pretty stringent.
Ross, can you hear any of
Put
us?
this picture in because this kind of summarizes the Great Western. They originally, you've probably heard of the book 6 Units to Sycamore. There's 6 F units here. That was 9,000 horsepower and about 300,000 pounds of tractive effort. And that was kind of their standard lash up for all their trains. They ran long trains and not real fast, but just they kept them moving. Well, when General Motors came out with the GP30, they could do 4 units and they get 9,000 horsepower and about 260,000 pounds of tractive effort. So then when the SD40s came out in 1966, they still had 9,000 horsepower and 300,000 pounds of tractive effort. So they're very standardized, very regimented railroad. Now, the Rock Island also came in very late. They built a yard in Inver Grove, and then they built a double deck swing bridge down in Inver Grove. And this line here is just a switching line. There was some industry up here by the airport, so they would cross the river on their swing bridge, and then they would get on trackage rights at Newport Tower, and the passenger trains would come up through St. Paul Union Depot, and they would stay in Milwaukee all the way across the short line to the Milwaukee Depot downtown. And then they had a small yard, as I said, right at Lake Street. And then the freight trains would go into Inver Grove. They would break them up into transfer runs, and they'd be running transfer runs all day. This way, and they'd go up the Milwaukee and the Burlington, and then they'd either go up the the Northern Pacific, or they'd go to Milwaukee to transfer to all the other railroads. This is a picture of the probably the plainsman in the late '60s, starting to look a little ragged. Right as it's left St. Paul Union Depot. Now, back in the day, they when they had some money, they had pretty flashy paint schemes. This is right at St. Paul Union Depot, probably in the '50s. That used to be their paint scheme. Well, then you can see later on as they started running out of money, they simplified things a bit. They just painted them maroon or maroon and yellow and just slapped a herald on the side. That was it. Now, if those of you that rail fan down at Inver Grove, you know that if you had to have a separate pair of shoes to go walk around and take pictures, because you would get out and walk around and you get back to your car and you had this big clump of oil and mud and everything else on your shoes. So we all had separate shoes in a box in the trunk because it was a permanent hazardous waste site, I'm sure. This is from your correct collection, Greg. It's a great picture right as he's going about to hit Lake Street. And this is Flower City Architectural. It's right at 29th or 26th Street, 27th Street in Minneapolis at 29th Avenue. And so he's come across the short line and now he's going to go into this little Rock Island yard right there. Rock Island also had a produce terminal right downtown Minneapolis, right by the Star and Tribune publishing house. And then later on, the power started, their engine started to look a little worse and worse. And finally, they just they went bankrupt in 1980. This shows how bad the track had gotten. All the railroads, if you remember, in the early '70s, it's much better now. That is one improvement right now. I took this Copper's Coke. Later, they tried to simplify things, and they hauled a caboose on each end of the train so they could have fewer moves when they would transfer cars to the Great Northern or the Soo Line or the NP, whoever. And this is at St. Anthony Tower in the wintertime, and he's taking a transfer run to Union Yard. This is coming down the hill. That's right at Fordson Junction right there. That's going over to the Ford plant. And you can see Schmidt Brewery. And this is a brand new, fairly new General Electric unit. And they tried painting them up a little better. This is the Rock after one of their first reorganizations in the '70s.